Hi everyone, welcome to the latest Tangelo Finura Elevate webinar. Really excited to talk to you a little bit further about AI. My name's Conrad Travers. I'm joined here today by Tangelo Director Celine Urtate. G'day Celine.
Hello.
And the great Peter Warren from Finura. G'day Pete.
Hey folks, how you going?
Really excited to talk through this topic today. We're seeing a lot of things out there, a lot of people getting really excited about AI, and the whole theme today is about making smarter decisions and just working through it in a more structured and straightforward way so that you can actually add a lot of value for your licensee and for your clients. So I've just got a few slides up front here just talking about what we think you might need to do to get the basics right before you look at the AI. We know that giving financial advice in Australia is fairly complex, and it's the old story: is if you build a house on poor foundations, it's not going to work. So one of the key messages that we've got, excuse me, is that it's really important to get your basics right first. So if you don't have good, well-structured data or processes, it's when you put AI on top of that, it's going to amplify things and probably exacerbate things rather than improve it. So what we'd say before you look too much at complex AI models, and this is probably not something you want to hear, but it's the right thing from a consultant perspective, is to really look at your data, your processes, make sure that they're documented, and make sure that the foundations of your business are really strong. And then when you put AI on top of it, it's going to be really effective because you're specifically looking for AI to complement your existing processes as opposed to fixing broken processes. Yeah, Celine or Warnie, did you want to comment on that?
I think you said it all, mate. We are sort of finding in the tech consulting lens that hitting everything with the AI stick is a bit of a common trap, that AI will fix this. And in reality, yes, AI can solve some of the problems that we've got in the world, but not some fundamental business issues. So I would suggest that if you are a business that's had a patchy track record with implementing any new technology, and every business in the world, I think, has had a problem implementing technology of some form, then AI is certainly not going to solve that. And it is boring, and consultants are going to tell you this all the time, but if your data is messy and disorganized and incomplete, AI will really struggle to get you the best result you're looking for. So I'd echo those sentiments, Conrad.
Yeah, which probably neatly ties me into the next section that we were talking about, which is actually just, data readiness checklist. As you've both alluded to, I mean, getting the fundamentals right is so critical. So AI isn't going to fix messy data. If anything, it's probably going to amplify what you already have, whether it's good or bad. So if the foundations aren't right, the outputs aren't going to be what you expect out of it either. So couple of things to think through is, centralized document storage. I mean, how many businesses have we walked into where there's Excel spreadsheets, there's financial planning software, maybe there's CRMs, there's stuff in SharePoint. So when you then overlay AI onto it, it's actually got no stable place to work from. So you can't even decipher through what's a current version, what's not a current version. Also think about standardized templates and processes. Again, when you go into an advice business or a licensee, if everyone's kind of fine-tuning templates, etc., there's no foundation level to then overlay the AI onto. Clear naming and version controls. I mean, how many times have we seen, final version 7, really final as the title when we go into, look at filing conventions? They're not even the same across the advice businesses and advisors or staff members in the business. So getting some of those fundamentals right is always going to be critically important. Now, I think the source of truth, and we always talk about this in the work that we do with our consulting clients, is unfortunately you need to have a central repository where your key information lives. So then you can actually better reflect, the use of AI in your processes too. And appropriate access and controls is obviously something else to think about as well, is making sure that you've got the right staff members having access to the right information before you even think about deploying AI over it. Anything else I've missed, guys, that you want to touch on?
Just from a practical perspective, if like looking at this looks a bit intimidating because you've got so much on your plate, one thing you can do is sort of take a 2-month project and have someone in the business who might be responsible for just kind of ticking these things off. So that doesn't seem like a massive thing, but it will pay off in the end is the main story, Wani, isn't it? Like obviously if you do these foundational pieces down the stream, you're going to get the benefit.
Yeah, like any, good diet or a health exercise program, getting the basics right from day one is really, really important. I think too, where you're going to find that, for many people in your workplace, your colleagues or your team, using AI is a fundamental shift in how we've done a lot of jobs over, for some of us, 20, 25 years, or some of us even longer. Yeah. So don't underestimate that, and bear that in mind too when you're expecting, in terms of how quickly you expect to see results. Everyone's going to have a wide spectrum of their ability to come up the curve, and I think there's got to be different levels of training and expectation put on different team members, depending on their confidence and willingness to change, quite frankly.
Yeah, and it's probably also not treating AI as a tool rollout, but rather looking at it as a business change. Like if you're looking at gaining efficiency, automating things, this isn't just purely a tool deployment, we're actually making some fundamental business changes as well.
Yeah. Now, in terms of choosing the right solution, for Neuro, Tangelo, we get a lot of questions on this, like what should we use, what's good? Yep. And because of our independence, we can offer a view on that. But one of the things that we'd really strongly encourage you to do is to look beyond the flashy demo, is to look beyond the presentation at congresses or PD days, and to look at the actual tangible value for your business beyond day one. And so the things that matter, and Wani will speak to this more in a moment, but it's more about how the AI can fit into your business, your existing workflows. So what are the actual tangible time savings for the existing tasks that you are already doing? How does that AI solution use your data securely now? So there's no actual sort of model training for the IP. It just actually integrates seamlessly. That actually adds to your compliance and audit requirements. We'll speak more about that in a moment because we think there's some real value that AI can play in that space. And then it's really easy for staff to understand. So anything that's complex or hard, we know that staff are a little bit sometimes set in their ways. So explaining to them how to use the prompts, how to use what tools are appropriate and what are not, where privacy risk exists. Those things are really important. And what doesn't matter is, like I mentioned before, all the fluff, so it's the stuff that it looks whiz bang when they're doing a demo on someone called Daffy Duck, but in reality, when you actually integrate your data in your business, it's not going to drive actual time saving or improve the client experience. So feel free to challenge these guys and actually talk about, we always ask them to say, give us some actual referrals from people that have used the system. And for proof of the time savings and things like that, rather than just the sales pitch. So yeah, I'll pause there, Wani, and get you to add to that.
Yeah, look, it's a really noisy world at the moment, and I think even if you look at your personal social media accounts now, like Instagram, and I don't know what algorithm I'm caught in at the moment, but I seem to have every AI app in the world marketing to me. Just the occupational hazard, I suppose, of what I do my browsing on. But and what I would say, the reason for that is quite simply is that the barriers to building AI applications are pretty low. You basically just need someone with a little bit of product experience, but pretty much anyone can be a coder these days, and there's a lot of platforms now that make it quite easy to build software itself. But there's a real difference between building an application that's quite easy to use and light touch versus building something that's secure and ready to hold client data. And we see a real distinction between those two. And I think some of the early movers in the AI space in our industry, particularly the local players, have done a pretty good job in terms of coming up the curve on SOC 2 and ISO 27001 and those pieces as well. So they're big ticks for us, definitely, and great to see they're doing that. But a lot of these businesses, they're raising a lot of capital, and the thing that's always telling to me is how much of that capital are they spending on sales and marketing versus product development itself. And I'll answer the question. You only need to walk through a trade hall at a conference to know where that money goes. I think it's no secret what conference sponsorships cost these days. I've written about it extensively. So I think, and there's no problem with that. That's their business prerogative to do those things. But the reality is that many of them, I think, intuitively understand that there's a bit of a race on with AI. There's a bit of a race to get as many customers locked into their world as possible, because they all know how ubiquitous a lot of this technology is becoming. The same capability that you can get out of the box with any note-taking app like Otter or anything like that, you can get out of the box with your Microsoft AI. It's now Copilot. It's now embedded into many other applications out there. We've seen platforms like AMP North release transcription capability now. Like, more and more of these tools are becoming quite ubiquitous. So you can understand, if I was building software in that space, why I'd want to do everything humanly possible to get as many users on my platform really, really quickly, and sort of find a way to lock them in with loyalty. So that's what's driving the noise, quite frankly. And I think what the challenge that often presents, I think, for business owners is, I'll often ask people, well, why'd you go with that tool? And they'll say, oh, look, they were kind of just there at the right time. They just popped into my feed, or they were just things. So that is not necessarily how you make big-ish technology decisions, generally speaking, about who was there at the right time. And even from a just from a general Finura research perspective, we get asked quite a lot, why don't we research some of the AI tools out there? There's two primary reasons. Number one is that the category is moving so fast, it's actually quite difficult to do any meaningful research on them, because you don't really know whether you're researching the application or the actual AI model that sits underneath it, because they're often quite two distinct things. And secondly, is there's just constantly new players all the time. So you'd just be forever chasing your tail researching providers. So that's not a space we really want to weigh into. I think ultimately what we would say is that a lot of these tools, and particularly the more narrow the use case is, probably the shorter the shelf life is, quite frankly. So if you are buying these tools, if you get value out of them in month one, awesome, great. And they're secure and they tick all those boxes, but they're probably not a forever thing, and you may move on to something else in the future. And I think we're starting to already see some signs of that, Conrad, where people that bought certain AI products are now moving to something else. And I asked them, well, why'd you move from that to that? And again, I don't really get a good answer other than it was either cheaper or it offered something else. Who knows? So we've even seen some instances of already some really heavy discounting by some of these AI players for their solutions to win customers. So pretty noisy space. However, the Finura, no secret, our view on this stuff is that so much of this capability will be in your enterprise solutions now or in the near future, like Microsoft. Simple.
Yeah. I think it's also that longevity risk as well, is if we're, pinning so much of what we do in business, especially advice provision, into some of these players that might not be there in the longer term. I think you just need to think about it from a risk lens as well, especially if you're operating an AFSL and you're outsourcing obligations as well. Is how much of your eggs do you want to put into the one basket?
Yeah, and a lot of AFSLs I've certainly spoke to have decided, look, they do want to offer choice to their advisors, and I really respect that because it's so noisy. You have to sort of, so it is quite difficult just to pick one or whatever. But I think constraining choice is just more practical, particularly where it's quite obvious that certain tools are not overly differentiated from each other. You're better off just picking one or two, and then your monitoring supervision responsibilities are somewhat more straightforward.
Exactly. Yeah.
I think you could also make a case for a smart decision could simply be, I'm just going to use Copilot and I'm just going to use it to take a really accurate file note just for now. And I'm just going to ignore all the other noise. And yes, there's going to be the guy down the road who's got so-and-so that says it does Y, but in actual fact, the real proof in the pudding is, does it save you time or improve the client experience? And if it doesn't do that, then you might just be wasting a lot of time versus waiting for those tools to really get up to scratch in terms of improvements to the workflow. So that could be a smart way to think about it as well.
And just to, if you want me to bring that to life, I thought I might just show the audience a bit about what we've been doing in Copilot with our customers at Finura. So Copilot obviously has the ability now to build custom agents, and we've done this for a number of our clients where we sort of have a sort of standard structure we use, and we allow them to really customize what they want these agents to do for particular jobs. And for file notes are a great example. So with these file note agents, effectively they can take either a Teams recording that you've done natively in your system, or indeed a transcript, which could be a Word document or a text document, which may be recorded on some other app you've got, which can happen from time to time, and basically take that transcript and then put it into a structure which is defined for a financial advice application. So effectively, all the agents really do are they're just a pre-built set of prompts and workflow that we can build in your Microsoft environment. So it means everyone in your business can have access to the same agent, get the same outcome, and obviously it's all built into your existing Microsoft subscription for Copilot Premium already. And one of the real great benefits of that, I suppose, is that we can then ensure that we get real consistency in terms of file note structure as well. And we've had a lot of feedback over the years that, gee, Copilot's not very good, and, we get pretty crap outcomes. You can sort of see here that we're getting really detailed file notes out of Copilot now. This is even producing X-plan summaries and paraplanning requests for us now, and all those sort of cool things as well. And the critical thing I just want to draw your attention to is that for those that are on the more premium versions of Copilot, you now have on this top box here these different toggles, which will basically trigger the AI to be more specific and detailed for different jobs. So all we do is really just train our users on how to toggle those particular GPT LLM prompts. And so the key one here is using the latest ChatGPT model, which is 5.4 Think Deeper, which will basically do a far more thorough job of researching all that context you provided as well. So in many cases, these underlying large language models are what is actually powering a lot of those file noting applications that are out there, the many hundreds of them in the world right now, and Copilot's simply using the same model for that. The real benefit is that when we do stuff inside of Copilot, it's inside our Microsoft environment. We're not cutting and pasting documents. We're not dropping things into another LLM, and it really can also work off our existing SharePoint data source as well. So that is a really powerful tool. We've done things like advice implementation, paraplanning requests, and a whole bunch of other workflows as well. And the good thing is, yes, there's a bit of cost in setting them up, but then everyone in your business gets access to them straight away. And there's also, for your IT managers, a lot of security control. There's now an agent, I think it's called Control Tower for Copilot for agents, effectively. So it means at an organization level, you get a lot of visibility of who's using these agents, what are they doing, how are they performing, and control. And then when we want to make a tweak to the agents, we tweak it for everybody at the same time. So there's just a good practical example of what we're seeing. And in time, what you will find is that there'll be more of these models here. A lot of people ask us about Claude. The Claude models are now coming into Microsoft as well, which is do an even better job of this as well. So we think it's really exciting. And again, we just want to minimize the number of screens that you've got to swivel chair from using these tools. Thanks, Conrad.
That's really great, and really practical. And like one client story I just wanted to share is we had a client in New South Wales who had built some file noting technology internally, and they had the option to use both ChatGPT and a couple of other tools. I think one of them was Copilot, but the advisor could choose. And one of the issues that we found with that is when the advisors were using ChatGPT, it was not within the Microsoft environment, so that data was actually going technically off to the US and then back. So you've got a privacy risk there. You've got if any client names or TFNs are entered, you've actually got a potential reportable breach. So what Warnie just went through is not an insignificant risk for licensees in terms of how they govern and manage this. We'll speak more about that in a moment, but that's happening quite a bit.
Yes.
So that's quite a concern.
Yeah, simple rule of thumb for us really is either use Copilot because we know how the data is managed there, or you will have to pay for one of the industry-specific AI applications that guarantee data is kept onshore and go through the necessary due diligence. And there's a handful of those that do that already. One probably offers convenience out of the box. The other offers integration. So you just pick your poison there. That's probably our tip.
Yeah,
good tip.
Okay, in terms of monitoring, risk management and governance, I won't spend too long on this, but I guess from a licensee and a advice, or even a car advice business perspective, we think it's really important that you find ways to track usage, adoption and time saved. We'll talk you through in a moment or later in this webcast a potential framework that you could use for that. So the first thing would be probably, if you don't have a policy, have a policy. And if you do have a policy, communicate the policy and train people on the policy. So people know what is the approved tools and what is not the approved tools. If you don't do that, it's just going to be the Wild West. People are going to be using this on their personal computers. They're going to be jumping onto ChatGPT all the time. And there's some real risks around that. So the first thing is to have some kind of policy or some sort of framework for what is acceptable for your business. And then what you want to do is think about how you then monitor the outputs from that. Some state, for some licensees who don't directly own the cars that sit beneath this can be challenging. It's easier if you've got a business where you've got access to the back-end IT systems to be able to do that. We've seen some groups look at attestations and things like that. Obviously, that's not ideal because it doesn't always pick up everything. But really thinking through like the governance, how you're managing this, making sure that people aren't going off the reservation, all of that matters, as well as thinking through the prompts that people use. We do have some advice businesses we're working with where Warnie or ourselves, we've helped them with the prompts that are going to help get the right output for them. And that's going to save you a lot of time if you've got preset prompts. And then training matters. So don't just do training for the sake of it. Make sure staff understand the risks of this, but also the opportunity to kind of improve efficiency. So the risk management and governance side of AI is crucial. I'd say it's still evolving because it's moving so fast, but don't do nothing and make sure that at the bare minimum you have a policy that's communicated, but secondly that you have some sort of monitoring and controls over what people are doing.
Yeah, and I think that human element is what we've also spoken about, and including the prompts as well. I mean, I know we've collaborated with Finura on a joint client where Finura have done all the thinking behind building it, and we've looked at it from a compliance and governance lens to go. It was actually the file note prompt to see how it could actually be elevated to ensure that the context of the conversation was equally captured, along with some of the additional things as well. So I think, as we were alluding to before, don't see this as just an additional technology. If you're looking at utilizing it across compliance, governance, advice process, make sure all of those requirements are actually embedded into it as well and not necessarily seen as an add-on.
Yeah. Just to the point around disclosure, guys, I just wanted to ask Pete and Celine your views on this. My view is that if I was a client of a financial advisor, I would want to know if they're materially using AI in the production of the advice. But what's your sort of view, and how would you disclose it?
There's definitely no legislative requirements to do it, but I agree with you from an ethical perspective, disclosure in your privacy statements, etc., where you are using it for fundamental functions in the advice process. I absolutely agree that it should be disclosed. If you're utilizing it as a bit of a sounding board, the human remains accountable, and maybe you're just using it to provide better insights, do things more quickly, and if it doesn't really have an impact on the end client, then maybe that's kind of the point where you don't have to disclose it. But where it's fundamentally having an impact on the advice, then absolutely. I don't know, Pete, I don't know if you've got a different view on that.
Probably a stronger view, to be honest with you, in the sense that I don't necessarily wear the governance hat that you guys wear, but I certainly have views on what is ethical. And so I feel, as a client of a financial advice business and as a director of a number of advice businesses, that we should not just be disclosing what we need to clients. We should be disclosing what they would reasonably want to understand. And there's two elements to this. One is if we believe that community expectations are such that organisations should be disclosing that their personal data is being used by any sort of AI, then yes, we should. And we should be explaining that. And I'm still yet to see an advice business have an AI policy that's on their website for clients to be aware of or share it with it. I've pushed a few that we work with to sort of consider that, and and it is quite interesting. The minute you actually put that challenge to a business, they immediately start thinking, "Oh, okay, maybe we need to think really carefully about this." Is the first thing. The second element is, I think, we are increasingly finding, particularly for our firms, Finera works with a lot of firms that are servicing the ultra high net worth and family office market. Now they do no recording or transcription of meetings because of the really sensitive nature of some issues that are discussed in those meetings with those clients. There's multiple stakeholders. In some cases, you've got clients who have controlling interests in ASX companies, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of good reasons why they need to do so. For those businesses, that fundamentally shifts what we can and can't do with AI, in the sense that we're not even capturing data with AI, so it makes it really hard then to deploy. So, and when you ask them, well, why is that? They actually say that privacy is one of the number one things that's sacred to their clients and the relationship they have with them. And I feel we underestimate that as an industry. I think the second element too is, I believe in the next 12 to 18 months, community awareness and community feelings towards AI are going to shift dramatically when people start seeing their friends, their family being laid off, with AI being blamed for the layoffs in particular. There's there's soon to be released documentaries coming out about AI and some of the conspiracy theories that are coming out, that major AI companies and what they're actually trying to do with our IP as well. And I think particularly as these AI companies become public companies, and they will soon, you look at how the world's changed its view to Meta, Instagram and Facebook, that we've actually now outlawed those tools for our younger people, rightly so. So don't bury your heads in the sand that your clients are going to have a wide range of views and perceptions about AI. And a lot of them don't understand that just because you disclose that you're recording a meeting, they may not understand that actually that recording then goes into an AI model as well. So I'm just going to put it out there. I think we made some predictions about it this year, but it will be a big thing, I think, in 2027, that advice firms are going to have to be a lot more prescriptive about what they are and not doing with AI.
Yeah, and I almost would consider putting it in the FSG.
Okay, interesting. Is anyone doing that, Conrad, at the moment? Have you seen anyone think about it?
It's not mandatory, so it's not required, but I think this is where, the FSG can actually, I've worked with some businesses to position the FSG as a positive document rather than just a ticker box piece. Yeah. So what we're saying is, as a business, this is how we charge for our fees. This is how we deal with your information from a privacy perspective. Have you got any questions about that? This is where you can go if you've got a complaint. And oh, by the way, we do use AI in the production of our advice. However, it's overseen by me. I will sign off on all the advice, and this is how we make sure that your privacy is maintained. I think that's a really positive upfront conversation rather than just using it in the back end and not talking to the client about it, because your clients are all using AI anyway. They're all thinking about it. They're all concerned about some of the privacy risks that come with it. So just why not be upfront and treat it as a positive? There's a
couple of bit of LinkedIn chatter this week, or I lose track with LinkedIn, but a bit of a chatter about increasing anecdotal evidence that clients are putting their SOAs into ChatGPT.
Funny you mentioned that. Yeah, I was just about to raise the same point.
I saw that.
Yeah.
Which is their prerogative, right? It is their SOA. But I'm keen to know, Tangelo, have you heard of that yourselves? Those issues coming up?
Definitely have. And I think one of the things that we probably wrote about not that long ago was about the amount of private and sensitive information that is in a statement of advice that technically doesn't need to be in a statement of advice. So we're talking about the advisor's responsibility of making sure the client's data is protected. But if I receive an SOA with all of my details in there, date of birth, address details, etc., so all of my personal information is now unknowingly, I'm uploading it into ChatGPT so it can assess the SOA for me. You're ultimately feeding your own information into AI as well without actually noticing it.
Yeah. And imagine if that SOA also came from a super fund or an insurer. It just raises all kinds of questions around who's got access to that information. Is that being shared with underwriters and things like that? So it's not an insignificant concern to pay lip service to, in my view.
I mean, to be honest, I think it's helpful that, it's interesting that clients are putting those SOAs inside of ChatGPT, because traditionally SOAs have probably just been shared with friends and family who are probably not as qualified to assess an SOA. But I mean, there's two things there, right? Does it show that the client doesn't necessarily trust the advisor? I don't think so. I think people like to validate. And increasingly people see AI as a source of validation of information like Google used to be. But at the same time, I feel like advisors are almost going to have to almost pre-arm themselves with the questions that AI is going to ask
Okay.
of your
Yeah.
advice.
Yeah.
And be prepared to answer those and defend the advice almost potentially. Really interesting.
I do think one further comment before we move on is we are seeing firms move away from the SOA being like the one-stop shop to defend them from all risk, and really, in Tangelo, we're very strong on this view that the SOA should be the presentation layer of the advice, the summary of the advice, and it works together with the file. And so people are out there radically simplifying their SOAs and getting back to the advice being the hero. And we've seen a move away from just disclosure for disclosure's sake versus, okay, you've got a really strong file note here. We can see how you've done the fact-finding process properly. Let's summarize that advice. So we're hoping that, notwithstanding the conversation about AI, that people are also thinking about the role of the SOA to support the client and understanding the advice. And not having it try and cover every risk that's under the sun. Yeah.
Getting some use cases. Get to the fun stuff.
Yeah, over to you, Warnie.
So look, we see a real sliding scale with use cases here, but obviously I think 90% of the industry now, I think our AI health check survey data says they're now using some form of AI for meeting transcription, so no surprise there. And look, I think it's broadly a positive. I'm keen on Tangelo's take because actually, I think a human taking notes is far less effective actually than an AI. Like if you want to actually ensure that notes are captured really accurately, I think this is a really good improvement for the industry that we're using transcription. And hopefully the advisor can just be more present in the meeting and ask great questions.
And we've actually seen that happen. So, I mean, in the transcription, the AI note taker actually picked up things that the advisor had actually forgotten that was even discussed. So it's actually a really great summary. But the earlier point, the human at the end of the day still needs to be in control. So there still needs to be an element of editor versus author. Yep. So, rather than the advisor now having to take the file notes, they actually need to ensure that the information that is captured is correct and accurate.
Yeah, we're seeing it also pick up tone, right, Warnie? So some of the tools can actually pick up when the client was concerned, which is actually really helpful for future. Yep.
Totally. Certainly we are seeing advice documents in some different shapes and forms being produced by AI. So I think, at the simplest level, and in somewhat concerningly, we are hearing more stories of people in businesses using generic chatbot like Claude and ChatGPT for producing SOAs, and now we strongly discourage that at Finura because it's obviously breaches the privacy regs that you said before, and the risk of hallucinations quite high still, albeit diminishing, but still quite high in our opinion, and often requires quite a lot of manual input irrespective for the advice to be consistently produced. So it is quite difficult with these generic AI chat interfaces to produce the same output every time when you put the same data in. That's probably just the first thing we'd say. There are definitely AI note takers who are now starting to offer light SOA services, we would call them, where effectively they are taking the meeting transcripts, the file notes and various things and producing what they would often, to their credit, describe as a first draft SOA that still requires a human in the loop. We would still, by and large, challenge that to an extent that even though it may appear that SOA is being produced in a minute or two, it still requires, in many cases, many hours of rework to get it absolutely fit for purpose, and in many cases doesn't actually incorporate reliable product research or modelling outcomes, which are often required as well. So you sort of have to look at the total process to really make an accurate assessment as, is this actually really improving what we're doing, or is there other ways of going about that? That said, I do certainly believe that simple no change ROAs, like simple things, it can be quite effective at, because it's not really, there's less advice risk in certain those communications, and AI can do those things really well. Again, we firmly believe Copilot can do those quite well if tuned correctly. And the final one that I think is underestimated, but one thing we do like some of the agents, whether it's Copilot or you use other tools like Claude to help you with, is being a better writer. I see some of the communication, particularly from perhaps younger, I'll be ageist here, but younger employees who haven't been taught how to write properly and use correct grammar, and particularly when they are communicating with a more experienced elderly clients who were taught how to use the Queen's English as well. They get really frustrated by grammar errors, spelling mistakes. I think in 2026, it is inexcusable that an email goes out from someone in a practice with spelling errors, poor grammar, poor language in general. AI can do that really, really well. And, if it was my business, I'd just have that as my 101 things, that we have a standard little agent that goes in all our emails, which corrects all the grammar, corrects all the spelling, and puts it in a tone that the client can actually understand. AI is awesome at that. I even use it myself for my communications now. So I'll use a little agent. It's called Pete's Email Assistant, and it basically rewrites every email as if I'm communicating to a 14-year-old. Now, I know that sounds really simple, but it's actually the 14th grade reading level. So I'm not using big words. I'm using simple sentences, and I've actually had some quite positive feedback, and that my emails have gotten a lot shorter and to the point. So that for me works well. I'm not telling other people how to use it, but I think client comms is a really good one.
Mate, have you
used
agent?
Your emails coming through? Yep.
Yeah. Sorry, I was going to say, have you used agents on emails to us, mate?
Yes, 100%.
Yes, perhaps, yes.
I should have disclosed that, Conrad. Sorry. But even as a thought partner, which I think is in this session here too, like just before you send in anger, hit send in anger, use AI to bounce that email and maybe sort of ask the AI itself, how will this email be interpreted? Is a good use as well.
Can I ask you a really, really dumb question, Pete? Oh, sorry, Celine, I'll come back to you.
No, that's all right.
What is a hallucination?
So basically, AI is not deterministic. So AI doesn't work in the way that traditional software works. So traditional software is all about a coding, a set of logic that you get two inputs. Two inputs creates the same output every time reliably. The way AI, particularly large language models, work is probabilistic. So every time an AI is responding to you, it is actually giving you, based on a whole set of probabilities, what's the most likely correct outcome next based on its learning. So by its very nature, it's probabilistic is the short answer there. And therefore, with that nature, hallucination doesn't mean the AI is delusional. It's probably a poor term. What it means is it just doesn't have it 100% nailed. So it's going to give you what it feels is the most likely correct response, not the right response. And that is what hallucinations fundamentally are. Yeah.
Awesome,
hallucinations were a lot worse in ChatGPT 3, the first version that came out. It was inventing all sorts of weird and wonderful stuff. But the newer models are getting much better. So the degree, and this is probably the nuance, the degree of the hallucinations are getting a lot less significant. However, no less significant if they get it wrong, particularly in an advice context as well. Yeah. I think you can skip this one, Conrad, because I did a live demo.
Okay, cool. Maybe just to cover off this point, I think everyone knows this, but we will call it out because it is Consultant 101, is that these 5 things are all connected, and if one isn't working, then there's going to be an impact on others. And we spoke at the beginning of the webinar about how important it was to get your process and your data right before you put the technology and AI layer on top. And we see significant data and process issues all the time in advice businesses. And it's not their fault. We have the most complex regulatory regime in the world. But it's important, and it really matters because, and not even just the process and policy side, the people side matters a lot. It's interesting, like Selena and I have been running the business for 7 years. We've had 82 clients across, everything from AMP to one-man bands. And the people stuff it always comes back to the people. Even though technology and process is really important, it's about, do the people understand the why? Have they been trained properly? Have they been empowered in their role? And you see so many gaps in small businesses around that. So some of that stuff, the leadership, the training, how you roll things out, how you explain things, how you allow people to ask stupid questions when they've got them, where they go when they've got a source of truth. They might want to come back and ask a question, and AI can play a role in that too. We've rolled out solutions where we've created a source of truth with a wiki sort of functionality, and those things are great. And you can actually really improve staff engagement if you get this right. What doesn't work is just rolling out a tool and expecting people to kind of understand it, and then people get confused, especially, I'll just say it, older employees who are fearful of technology. I'll just call that out. So take the time to do all of that properly, and then you get the ultimate, which is the client experience and the efficiency, which is what we're all after. But if you don't tick the other boxes, you're going to have some type of issue with the process. Yeah. Did you guys want to add to that?
I think just on the people stuff, I mean, as we've spoken about, I think there is an element of suspicion around AI taking over everything. So I think having people engaged in the process is so critically important. So, let's not try and boil the ocean. Let's look at narrow, repeatable use cases that kind of give people the confidence. When the use case is really clear, the value quickly becomes visible and they kind of start to understand that this is actually an efficiency earner versus it's going to replace my role. It's, if anything, it's probably going to replace the boring parts of our work that no one really wants to do versus replacing the human. Maybe the human engagement ends up looking different to what it does today, but it's still a valuable component of it.
Yeah, and one practical tip is you could have, say you've got a baby boomer who owns a financial planning business who's not as strong on technology. They might have someone younger that's really into AI, and what you can do is appoint them as a change champion to say that that's your role within the business, is to help us understand it, to train us. You might have lunch and learns and that type of thing, where you might go through Copilot and how you can do the best prompts and that type of thing. And all of a sudden, what may seem really complex becomes a lot simpler when people can kind of touch and feel it.
Yeah, this is where diversity comes in for me. So we have seen, we've definitely had businesses approach us, and a younger, really keen employees built a whole bunch of interesting stuff inside of Claude, for example, using Claude skills. I came across one recently of someone who'd built a whole bunch of Claude skills to do every job in the business, from advice production to everything else. But this was a business that was not self-licensed. They had a major FSL behind it, who I'm sure would have some concerns about what was put ahead. And so this person, they probably should be working for us, quite frankly, not an advice business. I'd love to hire him. He was so good. But this is where we needed sort of the wiser heads in the business to explain to him that, hey, this isn't our data. This is our client's data. This is a highly regulated industry. So just because we can do something doesn't mean we should, and learn the difference. And so the real art and leadership, as you know, and you're great at this, Conrad, is just getting that balance right between not stifling the innovation, but equally explaining to people what can go wrong when things do go wrong, and the consequences of those. So this is why I think having a diverse group of team members is critical, because there is a happy harmony there. And I think the challenge, we do have a lot of, obviously, businesses that seek our help on AI policy related things. I think, we've got a pretty good sort of standard template guide that you guys have done there, Tangelo, with AI policies with regards to AFSL activity, which is definitely your wheelhouse. Business policy itself, I mean, look, frankly, AI can generate a lot of these policies for you anyway, and it does a pretty good job. I think the areas that are harder often for a consultant to do are sort of guide business owners as to, firstly, what are those ethical issues that you want to document and codify? That's up to you. We can help guide the conversation, which is why we join a lot of board meetings for that. But then also just understanding the businesses, just the general businesses attitude to risk as well, is another thing as well. How much faith and confidence do you want to put in your employees to not do the wrong thing inadvertently? So for Nura, for example, we're ISO 27001, so we have a lot of risk and controls built into our business, but equally we are dealing with, our staff are very technology proficient, so we're very highly confident in their ability to not do stupid things with AI. Often other policies need to be developed to basically cater to the highest risk individual, which at Finura is actually me, ironically enough. I think, and often is the CEO in most businesses, yeah. I'm finding. So I think that's the probably thing for policies, is rather that, to use your term, sort of, Celine, not boiling the ocean, for me, is actually about the policies itself not being necessarily describing everything you can do, more about describing what we absolutely cannot do. Is probably, because otherwise you're going to end up with a policy which is 50 pages long. So I think that's probably the trick. And the reality is that it has to be dynamic, because the models move so fast. By the time you start a policy document now, it's out of date.
And it has to be principles-based as well. So, I mean, you can't be black and white. You can't think of every single scenario in every single situation. So I think it just needs to be, what are the elements that we're comfortable in utilizing AI for, versus what are the elements that are absolutely no-go areas. And that ultimately sets the ring fence around some of the activities within the business.
Yep. One thing we have been doing, we've been cooking up, is just to make life easier for our customers potentially as well, is just developing some AI frameworks which are more about the tools itself that you're using. This is where the challenge really is, specifically with advice tooling. So we are currently working on just a bit of a tools register here for AFSLs, IFAs, and larger licensees will have a more comprehensive version of this as well, just to help people make risk assessments on all the different tools that they're considering using. If you're getting pressure from advisors to use certain things, this tool itself can probably take you through a pretty quick sort of diagnostic as to whether you should be using that tool in the first place and for what job are you using it for is really clear. I think one of the real challenges, and so we'll start making that available in the very near future to our partners, but one of the real things I did want to call out, particularly where an AI tool was, let's say, approved by a licensee. So let's call it an AI note taker. I won't mention a specific name because it'd be unfair on any of the providers, but an AI note taker. And day one, it did file noting transcription, which we all agreed is a really good use case. But then day two, it's now doing other things. It's doing SOAs. It's doing all sorts of weird and wonderful things. And that's the bit. And a lot of these providers, they are not... they're just turning all the features on and saying to the businesses, well, it's up to you to tell your advisors not to do it. So, for example, like in our software business, when we turn on new features, we give licensees the ability to say yes or no to those new features for their advisors. That's a permissioning, it's called a permissioning control system. A lot of the current note takers do not have that. And so the real challenge is going to be, you will only potentially find out in an audit 6 months later that advisor was using that tool for something you didn't approve of. So long story short, that sort of governance framework we're putting in place, and we think you should require the AI note take AI providers in general to sort of answer back to you, should be on all new features that they're releasing to their customers and giving, so you can give proactive guidance to your advisors on what they can't do. And the other element I think it's really important is that, despite the fact that the AI providers are all saying quite openly, this is, we take all reasonable efforts to minimise hallucinations. It's a good first draft. They do disclose away all their responsibility on these things. So, and so they should. They absolutely should.
Yep.
So I think this is why, we still have this fundamental view at Finura that there's two types of AI. There is generative AI, which is the AI for ChatGPT and the note takers and all those things, and deterministic AI, which is an emerging, it's another AI, which is effectively gives us the same outcome every time. So we are already sort of working with some really well credentialed tech providers that are building deterministic AI solutions for this market, things like modeling and research and all those things you can't afford to get wrong. And so this is where I think we want to educate the advisors a lot better about the differences between this AI and that AI, and why you shouldn't be using generative AI for things that should be actually giving you deterministic outcomes every time. So that is the nuance, and I think that's not widely understood by the market just yet.
Yeah,
definitely agree.
Okay, we're going to go into questions now. Is there anyone on the call that is brave enough to ask a question?
I'll jump in.
Yeah, go for it, Lynn.
Not sure about asking the dumb questions. Yeah, the biggest challenge, Peter, is I think the one that I see, that you mentioned just now, and that is that these AI tools that we approve that are just really note takers that, do great jobs about creating, emails back to clients and file notes and so on. And all of a sudden you learn that they're actually creating advice, not only creating the advice document, but also building the strategies and constructing the advice as well, without any knowledge on our part. And our advisors are good in that they know that they're not allowed to do that. But my concern is, how do we manage that, because it's moving so fast? And, in those, and we don't have a direct relationship with them because our advisors engage them direct.
Yeah, Lynn, I mean, I 100% agree with you. I mean, obviously, I have a conflict because we run software that does advice generation, which doesn't use AI. So we've made that choice quite deliberately for those reasons, and we build it from an AFSL perspective first for the absolute reasons you just described, Lynn. That doesn't change anything, I suppose. I actually believe this is where ultimately you've got to exercise your monitoring and supervision controls on these advisors through education and making it really clear that if they use those tools, they will hypothetically fail an audit for using those things and educate. But that's probably easier for your organisation, Lynn, than it would be for some of the others who've got 1,000 of authorised reps. They just can't get across. So this is an issue which I think is challenging to solve. I personally I kind of wish some of these AI providers didn't go down this path, if I'm truly honest. But again, I'm conflicted, so I got to be careful what I say. But I feel that none of them have stopped to ask themselves the question, just because they, it's that just because you can doesn't mean you should kind of question for me. And I feel, I think we've got a bit of a ticking time bomb. I think something's going to go wrong, and a lot of these providers are going to hopefully potentially withdraw some of these features in the near term. That's my gut feel, but it's going to be painful for someone. Sorry, Celine, do you want to add to that? You've seen more of this than me, so yeah.
Yeah, and I think one of the fundamental principles we need to think through is the overlying code of ethics that advisors are governed by. So it's all good and well that you can utilize technology to make the process more efficient. You can use it to kind of start your basis. But at the end of the day, it's like you're ultimately responsible for the advice that's being provided, not some AI generated tool.
Yeah, just a couple of comments. One, to Warnie's point, because we get demoed all these providers and we always start cynical and work backwards, is you just hope sometimes that they start with being highly effective file note and then doing the workflow component, but when they go into SOA generation and product comparison and projections, that's what worries us a little bit, particularly if they're coming from offshore and don't know the Australian environment, haven't been through the Royal Commission, haven't been through 515, haven't been through all the stuff that you guys on this call know about and deal with every day in terms of the frameworks and the processes that were built up over time. So I do see a significant risk around that. As to how you effectively monitor it, Lynn, I don't think we have a perfect answer, but it's going to have to start with education and then having a clear view from a licensee and car perspective around what is approved and what's not, and then having some type of framework to check on that. Now, it's obviously easier if you've got employees and you've got access to computers and things like that, but for others, it's going to have to be about sampling and checking and fairly manual type processes around that until we get smarter on how we do that. I know that's not a perfect answer, but that's kind of where I'm at.
Can I just ask another question? And it's something that's sort of exercising my mind. Probably about 6 months ago, we attended Sydney University course on AI, and it wasn't really very much more than, all the things that can go wrong and how governance works and stuff like that, and which was good because that was good. But I guess really one of the things that they talked about was the fact that many of these AI tools, when people are putting together an AI tool, there's a whole shopping centre, if you like, of AI tools that you can pick, and many of them actually are built with questionable insides, if you like. In other words, tools where maybe bad actors have actually laid a trap for someone into the future. How do we get confidence when an AI provider is actually using AI? That I know we can look at ISO 27001 and we can look at all the data held in Australia, but how do we get comfort around that AI component?
Well, it's an existential question because it impacts everyone and every AI platform in the world. So at the highest level, I think there's a lot of public discourse now about whether we trust OpenAI as a company, do we trust Anthropic as a company? And obviously they are now taking efforts to build local relationships with local regulators and governments. So Anthropic's CEO was visiting Australia last week, I think it was, to set up data centres here in Australia and provide those governance sort of layers. I think that's important. I think if I go a level down from the big AI super companies, I think they call them the hyperscalers is the term, to the application providers themselves, and are they using our data to train their models? There's no perfect answer, but I've always found in life that the best way to understand the company is to look at the track record of the founders and look at the people. And look at the people who are running those businesses. Who are their shareholders? Who are they doing? What's their plan? And that will probably give you a better guide than anything else, actually, as to how they're going to take that company, how they're going to treat their customers' data. That's probably the simplest answer I can give on that one. But that's based more on experience than any other framework. Conrad?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And look, it's a really good question. And I think to Warnie's point, you can only control what you can control. So what information can you glean about that business? You're probably not going to be able to get into the back end but asking the right questions and then going back to what you can control in terms of the licensing in the car and saying this is our approach and how we would like to manage the risks around AI and what we're comfortable with. But yeah, you're right. It's a concern as well. Just wanting, while I've got here, we've had a lot of questions that have come through around what AI can mean for the future of different roles within financial planning, particularly around paraplanning. But really interested in yours and sort of Celine's view on how that role might evolve and what it could mean.
Yeah, I think the industry everyone's been really guilty of making some really broad sweeping statements about roles and not really understanding the reality of what will change. So, and a good example is paraplanning. So I know a lot of advisors who, particularly the ones that have in-house paraplanners, that are never going to let go of those people because they're so critical to the client proposition, bouncing strategy off them. And in fact, just doing a lot of things the advisors are terrible at doing. Paraplanners are so valuable for that. So this assertion that AI makes, I have heard the statements, paraplanning's dead. And I sort of say, well, maybe hacking Word documents together is dead. Sure. Yep. Maybe the way we do things is dead. And that's maybe not a bad thing, just like the fax machine is dead unless you work with certain product providers.
With some of that, with some of that stuff probably should have been dead about 5-10 years ago. Where we're merging together Word documents and spending 3 hours in editing templates.
Yeah, and we didn't need AI for that. Actually, there was other software that could do that. So I think, it's just the old sweeping statements from my perspective. That said, there are a lot of I'll choose my words. There are a lot of business models in our industry which are built on inefficiency, though. So there are a lot of outsourcing business models and others which are, have a lot to lose in this world where if we can, instead of it costing $500 for a human to edit a Word document on a poorly constructed template to produce an SOA, that we can do it with a little bit of software that won't cost a lot, then that model will go 100%. But the human in the loop element of paraplanning, I feel, is here to stay, and for the time being. And I also, you guys know, you've called us out a number of times, Tangelo, like this, the role of that paraplan in particular is the first line defence from a compliance perspective, quality of advice perspective, is to be quite treasured, I feel. And my other criticism of a lot of the AI tools, I was a news article I was quoted in the other day, which was talking about, the real risks of AI doing all the strategy work. Like, are we just going to train a bunch of people that don't know how to do strategy for a client, can't look at a fact find in a client scenario? And even, I remember my early days as a young paraplanner, seeing an advisor just on a whiteboard do the strategy, withdrawal recontribution strategy, and work it all out, including Centrelink on the whiteboard. Now, it might have been 100% accurate, but they get it pretty right. And you go, it's so confidence inspiring for a client to see their advisor be so confident of what's going to happen for the strategy that's, you take that away. If AI does it all, what are we talking to clients about in those meetings?
Yeah, can I just maybe add to that? One thing I think is that supervision and monitoring in Australia is a bit broken. So the 5-file review once a year is like, it'll tick a box, but is it working in terms of picking up client detriment? No. So we need to build better fences at the top of the cliff rather than at the bottom. And I think AI plays a really important role in that. And some licensees are moving to that model away from that kind of static sampling methodology. And I think it's really important because, what's worked in the past hasn't worked, in my view.
Yeah, so it's probably utilising the existing skill sets in a different way. So, Pete, I think you've nailed it when you said, from a paraplanner's perspective, they should have always been the first line of defense, in kind of challenging what is a strategy, what could be a strategy, making sure that it's transparent, it's clear. So I think their role ultimately evolves. It doesn't necessarily get replaced. It's just, like we said, they're just going to stop having to spend 3 hours in editing a template in a Word document.
Yeah, it's interesting. One of the businesses I checked, the employee survey feedback on ideas of the business, and this business has really embraced AI, doing things super efficient. But the one request for the team was to hire an in-house paraplanner. We want to hire an in-house paraplanner, please. Where outsourcing is not quite working for us, and we think we need someone here. So, who would have thought in a business has really embraced AI that their number one new role they want to hire is an internal paraplanner? So I'm not as I think the role fundamentally shifts and changes, but the role still exists. And who knows, we might call it something different. Maybe it's time to reinvent the term. But I'll leave that to other people to work that out. Yeah.
Thanks, KB.
So, Ben, did you have a question? I can see you there, and I know you've unmuted yourself.
just chomping at the bit. It's just like the perfect intersection of all my skill sets, Len. I could talk for about 3 hours about this. So
we should have had you on the panel, I feel, yep.
Again, careful what you wish for. I may exercise a bit of restraint, but I did have one question. It's something I've been postulating a bit in and around the aligned licensee versus self-license model, and whether, given the pace of change, there's a real distinct disadvantage of being aligned. You're very reliant on the licensee making decisions around compliance and those sort of things, but they're traditionally, as I well understand, more conservative in nature and also very slow in nature. And I don't know if that really matches where we are in an AI sort of climate. Do you have a read on that?
Yeah, interesting. That's a can of worms. I think there's it's a really good question. I think there's pros and cons on the self-license versus large licensee model both ways. So like we've seen people go self-license who don't have the skills to do it and have regretted it 2 years later and don't have the capability for it. We've seen people that have gone for the wrong reasons, like they're just pissed off with their licensee, and that's never a good reason to do it. You should have the appropriate skills, frameworks, and controls to be able to run your own license, which is a different skill set. And I'm really going to flag this strongly. Running an AFSL is a different skill set from talking to clients. It's really important that people understand that. Having said that, large licensees have struggled with all the regulatory change that we've seen in the last 10, 15, 20 years and are under-resourced and do the best they can. And sometimes they are subject to shareholders who may not be as comfortable with risks around how fast AI is moving, Ben. So totally get that point. You do find some advice businesses who are part of a network where there is that nice balance between risk and the approved tools that they can use. And they do like the sheltering of someone who's thinking about those things. But it's just a trade-off. It's a classic trade-off. So.
And I think equally on the smaller end of town is making sure that you got the requisite skill sets to be able to assess it and think holistically, not about just the technology, but about your risk and governance, etc. as well. So I think what we tend to find in the smaller licensees is they're definitely more adaptable to change. They're fast to move, but sometimes they're too fast to move without actually stepping to think through all the ramifications of the decisions that they're making.
Yeah, and the top 30% of those decisions is the unknown. We really don't know a lot of what's going on with the AI world. So there is a need to be a bit more risk averse. I certainly understand that. But I think the flip side of that is you're going to get left behind if you can't sort of align these efficiencies with a smaller scale business. Naturally, there is no answer.
I think there's always there's still a prevailing misconception that scale means better. And I don't think it does in 2026. And with any industry, frankly, other than there's huge barriers to entry or huge capital requirements. So I think every business model is going to come under pressure in the next couple of years. And I do get more increased rumblings from advisors saying, I'm paying $30,000, $40,000 a year for this AFSL and I really don't know what I'm getting other than compliance and a conference. And so I think, and we're all under the gun on that one. Anyone's providing services is going to be in the gun on that issue. And so I think for me, it's less about that and more about that side. And I do believe with smart technology, smaller AFSLs can actually probably provide just as good, if not better, services using technology in a smart way in the future.
I'm definitely much more bullish on that point. I think the idea around scale is that sort of combination of ideas that you can't get elsewhere, and you're leveraging that information and that knowledge collaboration. Totally. Whereas in an AI landscape, that's far less prevalent, and you do have a lot more information at your fingertips. So I think not that I want to get into a futurist conversation too much, but I think that is the nature of where industry will land, is much, much more smaller, medium-sized businesses rather than aligned with large sort of corporates.
Yeah, very good. Okay, we probably need to close things out there, guys. We are over time. Thank you for your attendance. Hopefully, let us know your feedback on the session today and if there's anything we can improve on. On the screen is listed some of the areas where Finna and Tangelo can help. Obviously, we'd love to support you if there's any opportunity. And so thank you very much for your time. Thanks, Pete. Thanks, Celine.
Thanks,
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks, guys.